The can was empty. Maya stared at it for a full 3 seconds, hoping the plastic might fill itself. Some small mercy of physics or God. It didn't. Behind her, in the crib wedged against the radiator, Iris had moved past crying into that thin, exhausted whimper that meant everything was about to collapse. She'd rationed the formula twice that day, already stretching it. Adding more water, watching for signs that Iris was truly hungry or just uncomfortable in the heat. At 3 months old, the baby couldn't tell her, and Maya couldn't afford to guess wrong. The WIC check had covered 2 cans instead of 3 this month because the application had been rejected for paperwork she didn't remember filing wrong, and the appeal went into some government black hole where it would probably stay. Maya set the empty can down. Not in the trash. Beside the sink, where she'd set the one from yesterday and the one from 2 days before, a small monument to timing and bad math. Her phone was on the counter, screen dark. She'd stopped checking it around 6 in the evening, when the notifications slowed to nothing, her mother in Arizona sending a thumbs up emoji to a video she'd posted of Iris's yawn 3 weeks ago. The apartment was too warm. August heat pressed against the windows from the fire escape, and the fan in the corner did nothing but move hot air around the studio. She was in bra and sweatpants, and Iris was naked except for a diaper, and they were both still overheating. Maya moved back to the crib and picked up her daughter. Iris's forehead was slick, dark hair plastered to her scalp. She rooted against Maya's shoulder, reflexive, desperate, the weight of her small and too familiar. 7 pounds, 3 ounces at birth. 5 months of this, of Maya's ribs still not sitting right, of a dull ache below her navel that 2 doctors said was normal, of the certainty that normal was just a word for you have to keep going. I know, baby. I know, Maya whispered into Iris's head. The words weren't words, really, just noise. Soothing noise. The same tone she used when Iris had gotten shots, when she'd had gas at 2 in the morning, when Maya had been so tired she'd forgotten how to read her own exhaustion. We'll figure it out. But figuring it out meant calling Janet at the bodega, who had let her run a tab twice before, and shut it down the 3rd time, more calling her mother. Which meant rehashing the whole thing about Marcus not being marriage material anyway, which meant crying, which meant time, which meant Iris would be even hungrier by the time she got the money together. Or she could call the clinic line, and a nurse would tell her that Iris could go to sleep without formula. That breast milk ran out, and that was fine, that babies had survived worse. Which was technically true, but didn't help at 11:30. On a Wednesday night, with $43 in her account and rent due in 9 days, she sat back on the bed and pulled out her phone. The screen lit her face in the dark. She opened her contacts and scrolled. Janet at Bodega, her mother. Her sister in Connecticut, who'd had 2 kids and money and kept sending her things Maya didn't ask for. An expensive stroller. A video monitor system. Charity. All of it charity. Even the love. Because love wasn't currency. Then she did something she'd thought about 100 times but never done. She opened a new note and typed, "Available formula deals NYC." The search yielded nothing useful sponsored results. Third-party sellers with reviews from 2019. A Reddit thread about mixing oat flour with whole milk, which felt like starting a different kind of tragedy. She closed that. Opened her contacts again. At the bottom was a number she'd written down 3 weeks ago. Something Janet had mentioned in passing about a guy she knew who worked at a wholesale place. Maya had saved it under F-Supplier like it was a real option. It wasn't. He'd probably blocked her after she called once and hung up before he answered, too embarrassed to beg. But Iris was whimpering again, that thin sound, and Maya's hands moved on their own. She typed the number into a new message thread. Her thumbs hovered. Then she typed, "Hi, this is probably a long shot, but I'm desperate. Do you know anywhere I can get baby formula tonight or early morning that's not a pharmacy? Or do you have any samples? Any help appreciated?" She almost deleted it. The pathetic was visible in every word. But she hit send before she could stop herself. And then she did the only thing she could do. She waited. The response came 3 minutes later. 3 minutes that felt compact and impossible. What brand? Just that. No preamble. No question about who she was. She stared at the text for longer than made sense, then typed back, Similac, or Infamil. Anything really, standard, she's not picky. The dots appeared immediately. Disappeared, appeared again, then, address. It wasn't a request. There was no question mark. That absence alone made something in her chest hollow differently. She should have lied. She should have given him an intersection and met him nowhere, or thanked him and taken her chances with cold water and oat flour. But instead she typed her address: apartment 4B. The building with the missing numbers on the mailbox. The one with the bars on the windows on the ground floor, and the smell of mold that never left the stairwell. The response: 15 minutes. Then, buzz 4B when I arrive. She was holding the phone when she realized her hands were shaking. Maya didn't shower. There wasn't time, and water wouldn't have helped anyway. Instead, she pulled on a tank top over the bra, smoothed her hair back with damp palms, and tried to look like someone who had her life assembled enough to receive a stranger at 11:45 at night. Iris had quieted, exhausted into a fitful doze. Maya kept her hand on the baby's chest as she sat on the edge of the mattress, feeling the small rise and fall, the proof of continuation. The apartment seemed smaller than it had an hour ago. Every floor visible in the lamplight, the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a continent, the carpet that had come with the place and would probably never leave it, the one window that looked directly into another building's brick wall. She'd cleaned nothing. There was nowhere to clean to. The dishes from lunch were in the sink, a bottle sterilizer took up half the counter, and a laundry basket overflowed in the corner. She'd learned months ago that apologies for mess were wasted on poverty. People either understood or they didn't. The buzzer came at 11:42. Not 15 minutes. 13. Either he drove too fast or he'd been closer than she'd thought. Maya's finger hesitated over the button. There was still time to claim the message went to someone else, to pretend her phone had died. There was still time to refuse. But Iris's weight in the crib and the empty can by the sink made the decision for her. She pressed the button and heard the metallic whir of the lock releasing downstairs. Then she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She looked in the mirror. Her face was tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Her eyes had a quality of permanent alert, like an animal listening for predators. Her skin was pale except for the dark circles, and her hair she'd cut it herself 3 months ago in a moment of what she'd thought was practical, but had been panic. It was uneven. She was uneven. She turned away from the mirror. The knock came at 11:44, sharp and certain. Not a tentative tap, not apologetic. Maya opened the door on the chain first, that small safety, and saw him. He was tall enough that she had to look up, and he was holding 2 cases of formula, the heavy kind. The expensive kind she'd only bought once after a bonus at a job she'd had for 4 months, before they'd eliminated the position. Behind him, filling the hallway, was the sense of him, some quality of presence that made the narrow space feel narrower. He was wearing dark clothes, expensive in a way that wasn't obvious until you looked close, a shirt that fit precisely, shoes that probably cost more than Maya's monthly groceries. His face was the kind of face that had been beautiful at birth and had only gotten more efficient with age, carved down to architecture. His eyes were pale, almost colorless in the hallway's fluorescent light, and they were looking at her with an expression she couldn't pass. "Hi," she said. The words sounded fragile. "4B?" he asked. Not a greeting, a confirmation. "Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't expect ... double quotes," she trailed off, unsure how to complete any version of that sentence. "Didn't expect delivery, didn't expect speed. Didn't expect him to be like this." He handed her the cases and she took them, nearly dropping one because they were heavier than she'd anticipated, and her arms were already tired from holding Iris. She steadied them against her chest. "That's 3 weeks' supply at standard feeding," he said. His voice was low, textured with something underneath, not quite an accent, more like an undercurrent. "Should bridge you to WIC reboot." He knew about WIC. That stopped her. How did you... Your text said you were desperate for formula," he said flatly. "At night. Running calculations from empty can to baby. Standard story. WIC timing is predictable." It was the most brutal thing anyone had said to her in months, and also the most practical, not sympathy, not concern, just observation. Just help structured around reality instead of feeling. "Thank you," she said again, because there was nothing else. He was still looking at her, and now there was something else in his expression. Something that moved beneath the surface like a current. His eyes dropped, tracking from her face to the apartment behind her, the visible slice of chaos, the crib, the laundry, back to her face. Baby's sleeping? He asked. Barely. She's hungry. Maya shifted the weight of the formula. I was about to make a bottle. You're doing it right, he said. The words were simple, but they landed differently. Not patronizing. Not congratulatory. Just true, stated as fact. I don't feel like I'm doing it right, she said, and then immediately regretted it. She didn't owe this stranger confession. His gaze held steady. You called a stranger at 11:30 at night rather than let your baby go hungry. You're doing it right. Something moved in her chest. Some tight thing that had been wound since the pregnancy test came back positive. Not loosening exactly, just shifting. Just registering that someone had seen the thing she'd been doing and called it something other than failure. What's your name? She asked. He took a moment before answering, as if the question required calculation. Kaylin. Not a name she'd heard before. Not exactly a name that fit the hallway of her building or the context of formula delivery. I'm Maya, she offered. I know, he said. The way he said it certain, unsurprised, made her pulse jump. She'd given no name in the text. How did you, Janet? He said. From the bodega. You called her about the number. Of course. The bodega owner. Janet, who knew everyone and everything, who probably knew that Marcus had stopped coming around 6 weeks postpartum, who'd never asked but had started giving Maya extra eggs on the count. The chain that connected her to this stranger was just Janet. Just one person away. She said you were good people, he continued. Said you had a baby. Needed help. I shouldn't have bothered you, Maya said, but she was holding the formula tighter, not offering to give it back. You didn't, he said. His eyes had moved past her again, to the crib, to the small sleeping shape visible from the hallway. There was something in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a minute withdrawal, like he'd seen something he wasn't expecting. What's the baby's name? Iris. He nodded slowly, as if filing it, as if the name meant something specific. How old? 3 months. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, quieter, more controlled, like he'd locked something down. She'll sleep better with a full stomach. Formula. This brand is good. Gentle. She shouldn't have issues. It was the most words he'd strung together, and the care in them was particular, specific, not the tone of someone reading from a script of generic kindness. I can't pay you back, Maya said. The heat in her face came from somewhere deep. Not right away. I have a job interview Thursday and maybe not asking, he said. He was already stepping back, retreating into the hallway. Janet knows where to find me if you need anything else. He was leaving and she should let him leave. She should say thank you and close the door and crack open a can of formula and feed her baby and not think about him. As something maybe survival instinct, maybe the bare animal intelligence of someone who recognizes power made her ask, why did you come? Really? He stopped at the elevator. He turned back to face her, and his pale eyes caught the hallway light in a way that made them look almost reflective. Because, he said slowly, someone said you were good people. And because a baby shouldn't be hungry. Not on my watch. The way he said it, not on my watch, suggested a scope of power that extended beyond a hallway in a building with water stains. Suggested he had watchers, had jurisdiction, had the kind of position where a woman in a burned-out apartment with a hungry baby could be someone's concern. Thank you, Maya whispered. He nodded, and then he was gone, the elevator doors closing on his careful, expensive posture. She stood in the doorway holding the cases of formula, listening to the mechanical whir of descent, feeling something fundamental shift in the physics of her small disaster. Behind her, Iris stirred, started to cry. Maya turned away from the empty hallway and went to her daughter, ripping open a can with shaking hands. The daycare facility was in a church basement that smelled like industrial cleaner and the ghost of 1,000 children's lunches. Maya sat in a plastic chair designed for someone much smaller, her knees almost level with her hips, and tried to project competence while her hands sweated through the folder containing her resume. The position was part-time, 15 hours a week, helping with infants and toddlers. The pay was $8 above minimum wage. It would cover approximately 40% of what she needed. It would have to be enough. The director, a woman named Cynthia with reading glasses on a chain and an expression of permanent mild concern, was reviewing her application with the speed of someone who'd done this 500 times. So you have no formal childcare certification? No. Maya said. But I have 3 months of hands-on experience with my own daughter, and I'm good with kids. I've babysat. That's not quite the same, Cynthia interrupted gently. We need someone who can handle multiple children, various temperaments, medical situations. I can learn, Maya said. The words came out too fast, too eager. She sounded desperate. She was desperate. Cynthia made a note. Not a good note, Maya could tell. The kind of note that meant probably not in pen on paper. The issue, Cynthia continued, is that we do background checks, and we need references from employers. Previous positions. She looked up. Your last job was, she checked the paper, 4 months ago? As an administrative assistant? They eliminated the position, Maya said. It was true. It was also incomplete. What she didn't say was that she'd been 6 months pregnant when they eliminated it, or that they'd done it on a Friday with no warning, or that fighting it would have cost more money than she had. It had nothing to do with performance. I'm sure, Cynthia said, and she probably meant it, but her certainty sounded like pity. Can I get a reference from that employer? The office manager is James Torres, Maya said, because she'd prepared for this, had practiced it, had called the main number twice and hung up before being transferred just to make sure the number was still good. He can verify my work. Cynthia made another note. We'll reach out. If everything checks, we can start you in 2 weeks. Training is unpaid, by the way. 3 days. You'd need childcare for your daughter during that time. Of course you would. Maya's mind was already spinning through the calculations. Her mother wouldn't come back for this, and childcare cost more than the job would pay. There was Janet at the bodega, but she worked full-time. There was the daycare's sibling discount, but she'd have to be enrolled to work there, which meant the cart before the horse. That works, Maya said, because saying anything else would eliminate the possibility. She was walking out of the basement back toward the street level when she heard someone calling her name. Not Cynthia, not anyone from the interview. She turned. The woman was familiar in the vague way that meant she'd seen her around the neighborhood, mid-50s. Dyed red hair, the kind of solid presence that suggested she owned things. She was holding the arm of a young girl, maybe 7, and she was looking at Maya with an expression of polite confusion. You're Maya, right? From the bodega area? Yes, Maya said, wary. She didn't know this woman. I'm Patricia. I live over on Amsterdam. Janet mentioned she's always going on about people. Do you know how she is? The woman laughed, the kind of laugh that expected agreement. She said you'd just had a baby and were having a rough time. I wanted to give you my number, actually. I'm always looking for trustworthy sitters. Lily here keeps me running. The girl smiled shyly at Maya, who managed to smile back while her stomach turned inside out. This was how it happened. You became a story. You became the woman with the baby and the problems, passed around like a directory of desperation. That's kind, Maya said carefully. I'm working through some options right now. Well, when you're ready, Patricia said, producing a card from her purse with the ease of someone who carried them. Janet said you were smart. Careful with kids. I'd feel good having you. Maya took the card. Thank you. Really. She was backing away, ready to end the interaction when Patricia's face changed. She was looking past Maya, and her expression shifted from friendly to something else entirely, a straightening of posture, a recalibration. Oh my God, Patricia said quietly. Is that? Maya turned. Caleb was standing at the top of the church's front steps. He wasn't looking at Patricia or at Maya. He was looking at the girl, Lily, with an intensity that made the space between them seem to compress. His pale eyes tracked the child with an attention that felt proprietary, protective, dangerous in a way Maya couldn't articulate. Then he looked at Maya, and his expression smoothed into something neutral. He inclined his head slightly, not quite a greeting, more like an acknowledgement of territory, and continued past them toward the street. Patricia was rigid. Her hand on Lily's shoulder had tightened enough that the girl looked up at her mother with confusion. Do you know him? Patricia asked Maya, but her eyes were still on Kellen's retreating back. No, Maya said, which was technically true. She didn't know him. That's Kalen Vorse, Patricia said, her voice lower. He owns half the buildings in this neighborhood. Maybe more. My husband met him once at a thing, and he said— She stopped herself, shook her head. Anyway, you don't want to get mixed up with that. I'm not, Maya said. But her eyes followed Kalen until he disappeared around the corner, and she felt something unspooling in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to fear. the sense of proximity to something larger than her circumstances, something that operated according to rules she didn't understand. Patricia handed Lily's hand a small squeeze and said, "Come on, baby, let's go," and they walked past Maya without another word. Maya stood on the church steps for a moment, holding Patricia's card and the memory of Kellen's look at that child, the way he'd seen her, the way he'd pulled back when he registered Maya watching. She thought about him showing up at her door at 11:45 at night. She thought about the formula, the 2 cases of expensive brand, the precision of it. She thought about "not on my watch." She pulled out her phone and opened her contacts. Kellen's number was still in her recent calls, the one she'd texted in desperation 3 days ago. She'd never called it. It had never sent anything but text to voice, which meant she delivered the message but nothing else. She sat down on the church's front step, right there on the cold stone, and typed, "Why were you at St. Catherine's this morning?" The response came while she was still holding the phone, so the dots appearing and disappearing and appearing again with a kind of urgency that made her pulse spike. "Aren't then? Should I not have been?" She stared at the question. It was both defensive and aggressive, like he was daring her to object to his movements, his presence in her neighborhood, his appearance at the exact moment she was walking out of a building. She typed, "Janet told someone about me. They know I had a baby. They know I'm struggling." The response came faster. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know," she wrote back. A long pause, long enough that she checked to see if the message had sent. It had. "Then people talk. You can't stop it. You can only decide what you do with your life when they're watching." She read the text 3 times. It wasn't comforting. It was practical, which was closer to what she needed. "Someone told Patricia you were dangerous," she typed. "Was she wrong?" he asked. It was a risk, the way he asked it, like he genuinely wanted to know her assessment, like her answer mattered to something. "I don't think so," she typed. "But I don't really know you." The pause this time was longer, long enough that Maya wondered if she'd crossed something, if she'd presumed too much in asking about him. If knowing where he lived and what he did was supposed to be the limit of their interaction, then, "I'll send you money for childcare while you do training, so you can take the daycare job." She stared at the text. "No," she said aloud, to the empty church step. "Absolutely not," she typed. "I can't accept that." "You have to," he responded. "It's not an offer." There was something in the finality of that phrasing, the bracketing of choice, that made her understand that this was how he operated. This was his form of conversation. Not request, not suggestion, but declaration backed by the kind of certainty that assumed compliance. "Why are you doing this?" she typed. The dots appeared and disappeared 3 times before he answered. When he did, the response was longer, different in texture. "You texted a wrong number and didn't apologize for the imposition. Most people would have. You just asked for help. That's either brave or broken, and I think you're not broken. I think you're trying. That matters to me." She sat on the church step with her phone in her hands and felt something crack open inside her, some wall she'd built to keep people at a distance, to manage the shame of needing things, to maintain the fiction that she could do this entirely alone. "Okay," she typed. Okay, I'll let you help. For the training. But after that, I figure it out myself." "We'll talk about it after," he wrote. She should have felt warned by that. She probably was warned by it. But all she felt was the strange, vertiginous sensation of not being alone in this, of someone larger than her problems paying attention. She didn't know that attention was about to change everything. Iris woke at 3 in the morning with a temperature that made her skin feel like a radiator. Maya knew this the second she picked her up, the way a mother knows not from a thermometer yet, but from the texture of fever. The particular heat that means something has shifted inside the baby's small body toward danger. She'd been doing the daycare training for 5 days. 5 days of learning how to sterilize bottles in bulk, how to manage 6 infants at once, how to recognize the different cries. She was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't touch. Her bones ached. Her breasts had stopped producing milk weeks ago, but her body kept trying anyway. Phantom letting down at night that woke her gasping. Now she was sitting on the edge of her bed with Iris's weight against her chest and her phone in her other hand, searching for fever in babies 3 months old, reading the terrifying hierarchies of what meant monitor and what meant emergency room. The thermometer read 101.3. She called the nurse line at 3:17 in the morning. The voice that answered was kind but rushed, already moving through a script. How is her demeanor? Is she alert? Responsive? Iris was drowsy, her eyes unfocused, her body limp. That was bad. Maya knew it was bad. Can you get to urgent care? The nurse asked. I don't have. Maya stopped. She didn't have a car. She had a Metro card with $7 left on it. She had the address of an urgent care clinic 14 blocks away. She had a fever-sick infant and the terrible mathematics of poverty at 3 a.m. If she seems lethargic, if she won't take feeding, if the fever gets above 102 or she develops a rash, you go to the emergency room. Do you understand? Not urgent care. Emergency room. Okay, Maya whispered. She hung up and sat in the dark of her apartment, feeling Iris's fever against her own body, and did the only thing she could do. She texted Kaylin. Iris has fever 101.3. Not sure what to do. The response came immediately, which meant he didn't sleep, or slept with his phone in hand, or kept it close enough that notification sounds reached him instantly. What's the address of urgent care nearest you? She sent it. Don't go. I'm coming. 15 minutes. She wanted to refuse. She understood, with the part of her that still maintained boundaries, that calling him meant deepening something that was already too intimate, too indebted. But Iris was burning in her arms and Maya was terrified, and 15 minutes felt like rescue. She got dressed without thinking about it, changed Iris into clean clothes, had a diaper bag packed by the time the buzz came at the door. Kaylin was downstairs, she knew, before opening the door, because the air in the hallway had changed quality. He was wearing dark clothes again, but this time they looked hastily assembled, a shirt unbuttoned at the collar, like he'd dressed in motion. His pale eyes took in Maya's face and then immediately went to Iris, and something in them went sharp and focused. Let me, he said, and reached for the baby. I can carry her. I know you can, he said. It wasn't kind, but it wasn't unkind either. Just factual. Let me. She handed Iris over, and the baby barely stirred, which was wrong. Which was the thing that meant emergency, which sent a spike of pure panic through Maya's chest. Kaylin settled Iris against his chest with a precision that suggested he'd held infants before, though Maya couldn't picture it. He looked like he belonged in rooms where nothing was soft. They were in his car, a black vehicle that smelled like leather and climate control and money within 2 minutes. The urgent care clinic was a 15-minute drive, and he did it in 10. The kind of driving that was confident enough to be casual about speed. He didn't ask questions. He called ahead, actually called, spoke to someone on the other end, with a tone that suggested they would remember this conversation, and when they arrived, a door opened, before he even turned off the engine. A nurse was waiting. They were ushered past the waiting room entirely. The doctor was a woman in her 50s who took one look at Iris and moved through an efficient examination. Blood work. Throat check. Ears. The diagnosis came quickly. Ear infection. Common. Treatable. Likely viral but possibly bacterial. They'd start antibiotics just in case. The fever would spike and fall for a few days. Infant acetaminophen would help. Lots of fluids. Monitor for rashes. Come back if things deteriorate. It was manageable. It was normal. It was going to be fine. Maya started crying in the doctor's office, which was the most humiliating part of the whole thing. Not the fear, not the poverty that had made her unable to navigate urgent care alone, but the relief turning inside out into tears she couldn't control. Kaylin was watching her from the corner of the room, and there was something in his expression that looked like he understood the particular shape of her breaking, like he'd seen women cry from relief before, like it wasn't new to him. The doctor sent them home with a prescription and instructions. Kaylin carried Iris to the car and held her the entire drive back. The baby sleeping now, actually sleeping, her fever beginning the work of breaking. He parked in front of Maya's building and turned to look at her. You're staying, he said. What? Tonight. The next few nights, probably. She's going to need monitoring. You're going to need sleep. I'm staying. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, he said flatly. I'm telling you. It's not negotiable. There was a quality to his authority that made it impossible to argue with. It wasn't that he was being kind. It was that he was being competent. And competence in crisis had its own language. They went upstairs. He settled on the edge of her bed, Iris on his chest. One hand supporting the baby's back, the other resting on his abdomen. He looked absurdly out of place in her apartment. Too large, too present, too expensive in a room made of struggle. You can sleep, he said, not looking at Maya. I'm not tired, she lied. You are, he said. You're exhausted. You're terrified. You're going to sleep. I'll watch her. Something in Maya wanted to refuse. To maintain the fiction that she could manage alone, that accepting help meant weakness. But the terror was real, and the exhaustion was real, and, for the first time in 3 months, there was someone else to carry the weight. She lay down on the other side of the bed, fully clothed, on top of the sheets. She fell asleep almost immediately. She woke to Iris crying, not fever-sick crying, but hungry crying, normal crying. Kaylin was already moving, already had a bottle ready, was already taking the baby to change her diaper with a competence that suggested he'd done this before, though she couldn't imagine where. The fever had dropped to 99.8. Manageable. How long have you been holding her? Maya asked. Since we got back, he said. It was 5 a.m. He'd been there for nearly 3 hours. He didn't look tired. He fed Iris while Maya made coffee. The domesticity of it was strange, wrong in a way she couldn't name. He was sitting in her kitchen in his expensive clothes, bottle in hand, looking at her baby with an attention that felt both protective and proprietary. Thank you, she said, and the words were inadequate, were just sounds trying to bridge the gap between what she had and what he'd given her. She's important, he said. He wasn't looking at Maya. You're important. Something shifted in the air. Something that had been building since the formula arrived changed shape. She felt the weight of it, the implication, the depth of attention, the question underneath all of this that she'd been avoiding. Why? She asked. Why is any of this your responsibility? He was quiet for a long time. Iris fed. The apartment was silent except for the small sounds of swallowing, the ambient noise of the city beginning to wake outside the fire escape window. Because, he said finally, I made a choice a long time ago that cost me something, cost me someone, and I've been spending years making sure other people don't have to make the same choice if I can help it. It wasn't an answer. It was the shape of an answer, the outline of something larger that he wasn't saying. What choice? She asked. He looked at her then, and his pale eyes held something that looked like old grief, carefully managed but still present. We should talk about this, he said, but not tonight. Not while your daughter's fever is breaking and you're running on terror and coffee. Talk about what? She pressed. About what I want, he said quietly. About what I'm asking for. About the fact that I'm not doing any of this from altruism. The words sat between them, and Maya felt the entire architecture of what had been happening shift. This wasn't charity. This wasn't kindness. This was transaction, or at least it was going to be. I'm going to tell you everything, he continued, but I need you to trust me first. Can you do that? She should have said no. She should have understood that any answer to that question meant choosing something she couldn't control. But Iris was fed and safe, and her fever was breaking, and this man, this impossible man, was looking at her like the answer mattered. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I can. He nodded slowly, and something in his expression settled, like he'd been holding his breath and could finally let it out. Then we'll do this, he said. But first you sleep. Real sleep. I have her. And because she was tired, because she was terrified of what trusting him meant, because she had no other choice, Maya went back to bed and left her daughter in the hands of a stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore. In the other room, Kaylin held Iris and watched the city wake up outside the window, and his face was a careful mask over something that looked like it might have been hunger, or grief, or both. The conversation didn't happen in the morning. It happened in the evening after the daycare training was over. After Iris had been fed and changed and settled into the drowsy state of post-fever recovery, Kaylin was still there, had never actually left. Had moved through the day with the kind of casual domesticity that suggested he'd been waiting for permission to exist in her space. He'd made food without asking, something with chicken and vegetables that required skill, required knowledge of how to use her broken stove and limited equipment. He'd done Iris's laundry. He'd sat with her through 2 feeding cycles, and at some point, Maya had stopped questioning his presence and started accepting it as a given. Now they were sitting on opposite ends of her bed, Iris asleep between them in her crib, the apartment at that strange hour where it wasn't quite dark, but wasn't light anymore. I'm not human, he said. Maya stared at him. For a long moment, she thought he was joking. Then she saw his face and understood he wasn't. What? She said. Not entirely. I'm Kavir, what your folklore calls shifters. I can take another form. A wolf. He said it with the tone of someone reading off a grocery list. Like he'd rehearsed this multiple times and had decided the only way to do it was without inflection. It's not a disease. It's not contagious. It's blood. Old blood. I was born this way. Maya didn't move. She was aware of her own breathing, the sensation of her body still existing in the world, still obeying the rules of physics. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice wavered. I know, he replied. That's fine. Belief isn't required. I'm telling you for context, for what comes next. He stood up and walked to the window. The city was visible in the dark, the lights of other buildings, other lives happening in parallel to this one. He pulled his shirt over his head in one motion, and Maya's instinct was to look away, but she didn't. And then she saw his back, and understood that something wasn't right. The scars were extensive, not random, but purposeful, arranged across his shoulders and spine in patterns that looked deliberate. They were old, faded to white, but they were deep. They'd been made by something intentional and had hurt. 50 years ago, he said, still facing the window, I was in a different life. A better life, I thought. I had a position, power, territory. I was going to marry. There was going to be a formal joining, 2 packs, alliance, the whole structure of our hierarchy reinforced. He turned back to face her, and his expression was carved stone. I was 23. I was going to have the thing every shifter wants, a pack of my own, a mate, children, legacy. He sat back down on the bed, careful not to disturb Iris's sleep. 3 days before the ceremony, he continued, I met someone. Not the person I was supposed to marry. Someone else. Someone from outside my world. Human, like you. His pale eyes fixed on Maya. And there was something in them that looked like it had been waiting decades to say this. I spent those 3 days with her. I was going to choose her. I was going to walk away from everything, the position, the pack, the mate I'd been contracted to. I was going to be with her instead. What happened? Maya asked. My family found out, he said flatly. There were rules, old rules, laws of the pack that went back centuries. If you rejected a mate, if you broke a binding contract, there was a price. They gave me a choice. Go through with the ceremony or lose the ability to bond with anyone. Ever. They made it permanent. A curse, if you want to call it that. Something woven into my blood that would prevent me from ever having a mate, ever having children, ever building the thing I wanted. They marked me with it. He gestured to his scarred back. Those are the marks of the working. They're magical and physical both. They seal the curse. Maya felt something cold move through her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because, he said slowly, for 50 years, I've been separate. I've been able to have casual connections, but nothing that binds, nothing that means. I've been able to help people, do good, build things, but I've been doing it alone. I've been living in my own apartment in the building I own and the rest of the world, and there's been a distance. A permanent distance. He stood again, too agitated to stay still. He paced the small room, his large frame making the space feel even more confined. Then Jeanette, at the Bodega, she called me about a woman in the neighborhood. Said there was someone struggling, someone with a baby, someone who was good people. She didn't usually do that. She doesn't usually reach out to me. We have a transaction, that's all. I buy from her. She gets a better price. That's the limit of our relationship. He turned back to Maya. But she called me anyway. And she said the woman's name was Maya, and she had a baby girl, and something in my chest shifted. For the first time in 50 years, something shifted. Because of me? Maya asked. Because of both of you, he said. But specifically because of Iris. When I held her that first night, when I came to your door with the formulae, I felt something. Something in the curse. Like it was responding to her. Like her presence was making it weaker. Less absolute, Maya understood before he said it. Understood what he was about to claim, and her body rejected it instinctively. No. Yes, he said quietly. She's going to change things. Not immediately. The curse is old. It's deep. It's written in my bones. But her existence, her proximity to me, it matters. It changes the mathematics. You're talking about my daughter like she's an equation, Maya said, her voice rising. Like she's a tool to fix your problems. I'm not, he said, and there was something in his tone that stopped her. I'm talking about the fact that she's a person, and her personness, her specific particular existence is remaking my world. That's different. He moved closer, and she should have backed away, but she didn't. He sat down beside her, careful of the sleeping baby between them. When I held her during the fever, he continued quietly, my entire body felt like it was burning. Not pain, just presence, like I was learning a new sense or recovering one I'd lost. The curse was screaming, and it hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that means something has broken open. What are you asking me? Maya said. She needed him to say it directly. She needed to understand what was being offered or demanded. I'm asking you to let me be part of her life, fully, not as a helper you call when there's an emergency, as someone who's present. I'm asking you to trust that I want her safety more than I want my own freedom from the curse. I'm asking you to believe that the benefit to her comes first. And if she gets hurt? Maya asked. If your curse does something, if your world, whatever your world is, if it touches her, then I'll die to protect her, he said, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. There's nothing in the curse that prevents me from that. Maya looked at her daughter, sleeping between them, too young to know that her existence had already become a pivot point for someone else's redemption. Too small to consent to being the thing that broke a 50-year-old working. I need time, she said. I know, he replied. You have it. But then his hand moved, not toward her, but toward Iris. He placed his palm on the baby's chest over her heart, and his eyes closed. Maya could see something moving underneath his skin, not visible exactly, but perceptible, like watching heat rise from pavement, like watching power recognize itself. When he opened his eyes again, they weren't pale anymore. They were gold, shot through with amber, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. I made a binding, he said quietly, just now. Nothing that hurts her. Just a promise, woven the way my people weave things. I'm bound to her now. To her safety, her well-being, her future. If I break that binding, the curse will take everything I have left. It will consume me. So I won't break it. I can't— What did you just do to my daughter? Maya said, and it came out sharp, afraid. I tied myself to her, he said. His eyes were already fading back to pale. So that she'll always be able to find me. So that I'll always be able to find her. So that my word is written into something older than words. He stood and moved to the window again, and for the first time, Maya saw him clearly, not as the powerful man who'd delivered formula, not as the mysterious benefactor, but as someone who'd been alone for half a century and was terrified of what being less alone might cost. You should sleep, he said without turning around. Tomorrow you start full-time at the daycare. I'll watch her through the night. Kaylin, I need to go out, he said, still facing the window. I need to run, to let the wolf out, to process what's happening in my body. It won't hurt her. I'll be back before dawn. Where are you going? She asked. Central Park, he said. There are safe places. Places where we go. Places outside the normal city. He finally turned back to face her. I need you to know that this is real. That my world is real. That I'm not human. And that means certain things are not negotiable. But your safety, both of you, is absolutely negotiable. It's the only thing that is. He moved toward the door, and then he stopped. He looked at Iris one more time, his gold eyes visible for just a second in the darkness before they faded back to pale. And something in his face was at peace for the first time since he'd arrived. She's going to change the world, he said. Not just mine. Hers. Everyone's. I can feel it. Then he left, and Maya sat alone in her small apartment with her sleeping daughter and the knowledge that everything had shifted in ways she didn't fully understand and couldn't quite control. The confrontation came on a Tuesday in October, 3 years later. Maya had stopped counting how many Tuesdays it had been since Kaylin first arrived at her door. She'd stopped counting a lot of things. The debts she'd paid off. The apartment she'd saved enough for. The certifications she'd earned. She'd learned to live in the space between gratitude and the terrible weight of owing someone your entire architecture. Iris was 5 now, old enough to ask questions that had real answers, young enough to still believe those answers completely. She was at kindergarten, a good one, private, paid for by someone Maya never saw anymore, but whose money arrived with perfect regularity. Iris had never asked why. Children didn't ask those questions until they were older, until they understood that gifts could mean debt. The building where it happened was one of Callan's properties, a converted warehouse in Red Hook that he'd been renovating into mixed-income housing. He'd invited Maya to see it, the first time he'd done that in months. They'd been existing in a careful distance, a balance they'd both agreed to maintain. He came to Iris's birthday parties. He took her to the park on Saturdays. He was present but not intrusive, helpful but not controlling. It was a dance they'd learned over 3 years, and it worked, mostly. As long as they didn't talk about what had happened the night of the fever, what he'd bound her to, what the curse was still doing to him. She'd brought Iris with her that Tuesday. The child was running through the construction site in her school uniform, pointing at the steel beams and asking questions about how buildings were made. Maya was standing beside Kaylin in what would eventually be the lobby, looking at architectural drawings, when the temperature dropped. It wasn't a metaphor. The air literally changed, became cold enough that Maya could see her breath. Iris stopped running and turned, her small face confused, and that's when they arrived. 3 of them, moving through the construction site with a purpose that made the space feel smaller. They looked human, but they were wrong in the same way Kaylin was wrong, too present. Too aware, like they occupied more space than their bodies should allow. An older man with silver hair and a face carved from authority. A woman with dark eyes that held centuries of patience. A younger man, maybe 30, with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Kaylin Vorse, the older man said, and his voice carried a weight that made the beams overhead creak. Kellen's entire body changed. It was subtler, straightening of spine, a shift in the way he breathed, but it was the change of someone stepping into armor. "Pack," he said flatly. "You're far from territory." "We came to talk," the woman said. Her voice was smooth, reasonable, and therefore terrifying. "About the girl." Maya grabbed Iris's hand. "The girl is human," Kaylin said. "She's not Pack business." "The girl is the reason the curse is failing," the silver-haired man said. "We can feel it, even from a distance. The working you were given is unraveling. That makes it Pack business. That makes it our business." "She's a child," Kaylin said. "She's a tool," the younger man said, and he smiled. "A useful one. If the curse is weakening because of her presence, then her presence could be used to finish breaking it. Or, alternately, her presence could be used to reinforce it. It depends on what you're willing to negotiate." Iris was gripping Maya's hand hard enough to hurt. "Mummy," she whispered. "Who are they?" "Stay behind me," Maya said, but there was nowhere to go. They were in an empty warehouse with 3 people who didn't seem bound by the normal rules of physics or consequence. "You're not taking her," Kaylin said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, categorical and absolute. "We're not asking," the woman said. "We're informing you. The council has made a decision. The curse on you is old, and it's causing disruption. Either the girl comes with us, and we determine whether her binding to you can be severed and redirected, or you come with us, and we recommit the curse at full strength. Those are the options. There's a third option," Kaylin said quietly. He moved, and it was fast enough that Maya's eyes couldn't track it properly. He was suddenly between her and Iris, and the space where he'd been was empty, and the 3 figures had gone still like they were calculating something. "I sever the binding myself," he continued. "Right here. Right now. I break the connection before it can be weaponized. I take back the working I did, reverse it, leave the girl untouched. The curse remains on me, unchanged. The girl remains human, unchanged. And you leave." "You can't do that," the silver-haired man said. "The binding is written into her now. To break it would—" "I know what it would do," Kaylin said. He turned to look at Maya, and his eyes were already shifting toward gold. "It's the only way." "Kaylin, no," Maya said. She understood, before he explained, understood that breaking a binding that deep would cost him something irreversible. She'd learned enough about his world to know that magic had prices, that old magics had steeper prices, that a binding made at the level he'd made this one would require sacrifice. "Yes," he said. He looked at Iris. "Close your eyes, sweetheart. Don't watch this part." "Daddy," Iris said, and the word broke something in Maya's chest because it was the first time she'd said it without question, the first time she'd called him that without doubt. "Don't." "I have to," he said. "I love you. I'm going to always love you. That's not going to change. But I need you to be safe. I need you to be yours." He turned back to the 3 figures. "If I do this," he said, If I break the binding and take the consequence, the curse stays mine. Fully mine. No weakening. No chance of recovery. It's reinforced. Absolute. Is that acceptable? The woman nodded slowly. That's acceptable. More than acceptable. Kalen closed his eyes. His body began to glow, literally glow, with a light that came from underneath his skin, gold and red and something that looked like it was burning. The scars on his back, the ones Maya had seen years ago, appeared in his shirt, became visible even though the fabric didn't tear. They were glowing too, drawing the light out of him, pulling something essential away from the center. He screamed. It was a sound that contained 50 years of isolation and 3 years of desperate hope, and it echoed through the empty warehouse like something breaking permanently. Then it stopped. The light faded. He was standing, still breathing, but something in him had gone quiet. Something vital had been removed. It's done, he said. His voice sounded different, thinner, less present. The binding's broken. She's free. He turned to Iris. You're free, baby. You're just yours now. Nobody else's. Just yours. But you're still, Iris started. Still your friend, he said. Still here, still around, but not bound. Not connected through magic. Just through choice. And I choose you. I will always choose you. But you get to be yourself without me being woven into it. The three figures looked at each other and the woman nodded. The terms are met. Let's go, Kalen. Back to the council. There will be consequences for what you've done, but there were always going to be consequences. At least now, they're yours alone. No, Maya said. He stays. The silver-haired man looked at her with something that might have been pity. He doesn't get to stay. The council has jurisdiction. I invoke sanctuary, Kalen said flatly. Human law. One, invoke it here, on this property in this city. She is my witness. The girl is my witness. Under human law, you cannot remove me without violating sanctuary. The woman smiled, and it was a smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this. How clever. How very desperate. Fine, sanctuary holds. For 7 days. After that, the exemption expires. And you come with us, or we burn every property you own, destroy every human life you've connected to, and take the girl anyway. They left. Simply turned and walked back through the construction site and disappeared. And the temperature returned to normal, and the world snapped back into its regular shape. Kalen collapsed. Underscore, 7 years later. Maya sat in the apartment that had been theirs, hers and Iris's, and, increasingly, Kellenzen watched her daughter do homework at the kitchen table. Iris was 12 now, old enough to understand some of what had happened in the warehouse, old enough to ask questions that didn't have good answers. The binding had been broken exactly as Kalen had promised. Iris had no magical connection to him, no supernatural pull. She was entirely human, entirely separate, but Kalen had stayed. He'd invoked sanctuary, and then, when the 7 days came, he'd simply not appeared at the council's demanded meeting. Instead, he'd gone deeper into the city's human infrastructure, had become almost invisible, had maintained a careful distance from anything official. He'd aged in the years since. Not physically, that wasn't how his kind worked, but in some other way. The gold in his eyes had faded to pale, and the pale had faded to something closer to grey. It was like the binding breaking had taken something essential and hadn't given it back. He came to the apartment 3 times a week. He helped Iris with math. He made dinner. He existed in the periphery of their lives in a way that was no longer magical, no longer binding, but no less real. Maya was working full-time now as the manager at the daycare center where she'd first applied. She had benefits. She had savings. She had built something. On the table in front of her, waiting to be mailed, was an acceptance letter, a scholarship to study social work at City College. She'd applied on impulse, certain they'd reject her, and they hadn't. She was going to start in the fall. She picked up the letter and looked at it. At the official seal, at the dates, at the proof that she was moving forward into something she'd built herself. Not salvage, building. There was a knock at the door, 3 sharp raps that she recognized. She opened it, and Kalen was there with groceries, and something that looked like exhaustion wearing a human face. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she replied. Behind her, Iris called out, "Kalen, help me with this geometry problem." He nodded and moved past Maya into the apartment, and there was a moment, just a moment, where their eyes met, and she saw something in his that looked like peace, not happiness, not recovery from the curse that would never release him. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd chosen right when the choice costs everything. Maya closed the door and moved to the window. Outside, the city was visible in the evening light, the buildings, the streets, the lives layering over each other in infinite variation. Somewhere in that city, the council was still waiting. Somewhere in that city, the curse was still working, still binding him to his sacrifice. But here, in this apartment, her daughter was learning geometry from the man who'd broken his own magic to keep her free. And Maya was holding an acceptance letter to a future she'd built through work and terror and refusal to accept her circumstances as final. She placed the letter on the windowsill just there in the fading light where she could see it every day. A small object, a simple image, a promise that some things, once begun, continue forward even when the cost is everything. Behind her, Iris laughed at something Kaelin said, and the sound filled the apartment like light.